So for this next talk, we're going to bring on Daniel from Rootstock Labs, and we're going to learn about all the stuff that's happening with Rootstock and L2s on Bitcoin. So please give Daniel a big round of applause.
Hey, everybody. How you all doing? Cool. I'm Daniel. I'm from Rootstock Labs. I'm the Chief Executive Officer. We are the developers, contributors, and original builders of Rootstock and designers and builders of Riff. So, it's 3:30 in the afternoon. Let's have a small amount of fun. Who in the audience has bought, holds, or mined Bitcoin? Okay, if you've never touched Bitcoin at a crypto conference, I'm not quite sure. Okay, let's do it the other way around. Who's never touched Bitcoin in their life? Okay, that's a little bit better. Okay, maybe someone came in through USDC or someone got some ETH maxis here. Okay, so our mission at Rootstock Labs is to make Bitcoin work for everyone. As you will probably know, the Bitcoin ecosystem is full of toxic maximalism, neo-technical elites, and people who want to basically build a new aristocracy with Bitcoiners at the top. We don't believe in that. We're Bitcoin pragmatists. We think that the Bitcoin network is an incredible cryptographic layer that can secure the entire global economy. And our role is basically to help scale Bitcoin so that everybody can interface with it, and hopefully some of you people in the room as well. It's the first time I've ever done this presentation, so I was under express instructions not to, I think it was from Kartik, not to run a standard pitch, so we've created something new. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Rootstock and our relationship with the Bitcoin L2s, seen through the eyes of this man, which is Charles Darwin. It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. Everyone's aware of Darwinian concepts. If you look at it within the context of the global market and venture capital and crypto's role within that, I've actually described to my mum once what I do, and I basically said, if you imagine all of the money in the world, and imagine the pension plans, well, the pension plans need to invest in a whole range of different assets. And the top of that, they have venture capital, which is very high risk. And within venture capital, you have crypto, which is super, super high risk. That makes it very competitive. In fact, it makes it ferociously competitive, a little bit like a jungle. To give you an idea of the scale of the opportunity and why so many people are flooding into Bitcoin L2s right now, Bitcoin has this enormous market cap, 1.2 trillion, but only 0.2%, so 2.5 billion, is used in DeFi apps. When you compare that to Ethereum, which has a lower market cap, there's about 17% of all ETH and value staked in DeFi apps. That basically means that just in comparison to Ethereum, there's a $221 billion opportunity that Bitcoin L2s are chasing after. So enter Rootstock, the first and most secure Bitcoin L2. The idea of Rootstock is relatively simple. What if you took the security and store of value secured by proof of work that Bitcoin represents, and you combined it with the programmability and composability of Ethereum, and that is Rootstock. It's an EVM chain secured by the Bitcoin network using Bitcoin as the native asset. It was originally conceived back in 2015 and forged in the fires of the terrible Argentinian economy by a team of Argentinian developers who basically wanted to see, off the back of a series of conversations with CryptoPunk, Nick Szabo, and supported by Adam Back's work, what if they could fuse these two chains together. There's a couple of concepts that we pioneered. The first one is merge mining. So originally in Bitcoin talks, Satoshi Nakamoto proposed recycling the hash rate of Bitcoin to secure a second chain. We developed the merge mining protocol and were the first to launch it. And then Adam Back's work at Liquid proposed what if you could create some kind of mechanism to lock Bitcoin on the main network and unlock essentially a Bitcoin stablecoin on a second network. They did incredible work writing a white paper, but we built it faster and launched it before they did. So we were the first implementation of a Bitcoin sidechain. Mainnet went live in 2018. It's never gone down for 6.5 years. It is a tank, an Argentinian tank, if you will. It used to be called RSK for those that have been around long enough, but we rebranded it to Rootstock recently because that was what we call it anyway. So what have we been doing for 6.5 years? Anyone in the room that's interfaced with any kind of blockchain L1 foundation will tell you that bootstrapping an ecosystem is extremely hard. We launched in a down market. We got caught blindsided by the DeFi summer that happened in COVID. And this was not a Bitcoin summer. It was an Ethereum summer. But we've been building. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about Rootstock, tell you about our journey, and tell you a bit about what Bitcoin L2s are and how we're different. So the simple way to think about Rootstock is as the most secure and first Bitcoin L2, we have 3 characteristics which are novel. We are cryptographically, economically, and monetarily aligned with Bitcoin. So first, the merge mining protocol, every block, every transaction that is, every Rootstock block and transaction is hashed on the Bitcoin mainnet. That means that everything that is processed on Bitcoin, everything that's processed on Rootstock is hashed into Bitcoin. So the entire network is secured by Bitcoin proof of work. Bitcoin is king in Rootstock. There is no competing money token. Bitcoin is the gas token. Bitcoin is ETH on Rootstock. The reason this matters is there is no alt token that's competing for monetary superiority on this Bitcoin sidechain. No problem competing for monetary superiority on other chains, but on Rootstock, given our nature as a Bitcoin sidechain, we didn't want to compete with Bitcoin itself. And then finally, we have total economic alignment with the Bitcoin miners and the Bitcoin network. So 79% of all of the transaction fees from Rootstock go directly to the Bitcoin miners that are merge mining with us. So zooming out a little bit to try and find our place in the context. So launching back in 2018 and building from 2015-16 onwards, there are kind of two hype cycles that we're traveling along. The first one is the original EVMs and the original layer ones that were built in the kind of ICO era between 2016 and 2017. This was the peak of the hype cycle for layer ones. Blockchains right at the top of Gartner's economic hype cycle. Bunch of different things going on here. So the launch of Ethereum and EVMs basically allowed Rootstock to be built and launched. The enabler was the first development of DeFi primitives and our creation of merge mining. The amount of money that was sloshing around, during the ZERP period and the ICOs meant that we were able to build a massive ecosystem. But multiple bear markets, intense US friction has meant that this wave of L1s generally struggled. So those of you that know how the hype cycle continues will know that after 6 years on the hype cycle, we have basically moved along and we're climbing up the plateau of productivity. So the resilience of the network and the resilience of the ecosystem has really helped us over the last couple of years. But we're also traveling along this second hype cycle. So since the first one in 2016, Gartner now have their own blockchain hype cycle, so you can start to see how the different components within the wider blockchain development space are also traveling. Doesn't look like 2022 is particularly optimistic. Looking at this graph now, everyone's sliding down the slope. But the big trigger for the Bitcoin L2s was the launch of zero-knowledge rollups on Ethereum, and somebody essentially asking the question, what if you could launch a zero-knowledge rollup on Bitcoin? So along with that, some of the BitVM research run by Robin Linus in 2023, the advent of Opstack and the launch of a very successful L2 ecosystem, and then inflated by the ETFs, the Bitcoin DeFi movement, which grew between 2021 and 2024, a lot of VC interest and experimentation has meant that while it's still very early and no optimistic rollup has been launched on Bitcoin to date, there are nearly 80 teams working on this today, and there are 20 Bitcoin sidechains which are live on mainnet. So interesting thing to note here is that we're now actually driving innovation within this by launching BitVM-X, which is an implementation of the BitVM protocol, but we think we can launch it to build a bridge to Bitcoin, a better bridge to Bitcoin, which is 10x cheaper than BitVM. So the message here is quite simple. We're traveling along two hype cycles simultaneously, one in which we're reaching maturity, happily skating along the plateau of productivity, but also trying to drive innovation with our work with BitVM-X. Evolution in numbers, if you've been around for long enough, this is generally what your graphs look like, some ups, some downs, and some roller coasters. So most exciting thing about Rootstock is over 160 protocols now live on the network, and as you can see, we've seen incredible growth over the last 12 months alone. Nearly 3,000 Bitcoin locked in a two-way peg, and the network is secured by nearly 60% of the entire hash rate of the Bitcoin main chain. So that means that 60% of the hashing power that's securing Bitcoin is also securing Rootstock as well. What does Rootstock look like today? It's a very simplified diagram of how Rootstock functions. You have Bitcoin Core, sharing hash rate with the merge mining protocol with Rootstock Core, which is an EVM. And then there are two bridges to Bitcoin, which allow Bitcoin to flow between the Bitcoin network and Rootstock. The first is the PowPeg, which has been live for 6.5 years. And we've evolved the PowPeg over the last 6.5 years from what was originally a federated multisig into something which is now the PowPeg. And we believe that through our defense in depth principles, we've built the most resilient and most performant Bitcoin bridge in existence today. And with BitVM-X, we're going to be developing the Union Bridge, which is going live in 2025. This is a mechanism to use disputable computation to bridge Bitcoin from the Bitcoin network into a sidechain. But Rootstock is more than just the blockchain, it's also an ecosystem. So we have some of the leading DeFi protocols from Ethereum now on Rootstock. That includes SushiSwap, Uniswap, Symbiosis, as well as some of the native OGs that built and launched on Rootstock back in the day, including Sovereign, one of the biggest and best known Bitcoin DeFi protocols in the world, and Money on Chain, the first Bitcoin collateralized stablecoin, which launched over 5 years ago. We've also done a big push to make sure that the best developer tools from Ethereum are also available for Rootstock to allow people to build on Bitcoin in an easy and comfortable way. So that means that the Graph, Gelato, Alchemy, Third Web, Hardhat, Covalent, and many others are now available to build on Rootstock. So that means that the development tools that Ethereum devs are comfortable with and familiar with, you can now use to build on a network that's cryptographically, economically, and monetary aligned to Bitcoin. Okay, here's the spicy bit. So we launched the first Bitcoin sidechain back in 2018. EVM compatible, fully secured by the Bitcoin network, the first implementation of merge mining, and the unit of account being Bitcoin itself. Following that, there was a batch of other what are called Bitcoin L2s. So important thing to note here is that in Ethereum, an L2 means something very specific. But in Bitcoin, it means anything that's used to scale the Bitcoin network. So that could be an EVM chain like Rootstock, or it could be a state channel payment network like Lightning. Shortly after Rootstock, Lightning launched, and shortly after Lightning, Liquid launched. Liquid is Adam Back's protocol, which is a semi-permissioned sidechain, which is primarily used by large exchanges and asset managers to move and interact with Bitcoin. And very successful in its own right. They've just raised a significant amount of money, and we're hugely grateful to them for shining a light on the pathway that has been Rootstock. Stacks launched into 2021. It's become dominated by NFTs and a whole range of exciting use cases. And I would call these four the kind of four OGs of the Bitcoin sidechain world. Since then, we've seen a whole range of different protocols launch, and I think this is where things get a little bit murkier. You have a number of different consensus mechanisms being used to secure these sidechains. You have unit of accounts, which are not Bitcoin and are supporting a secondary token. And in some cases, you have sidechains which are not even being secured by Bitcoin and don't have Bitcoin as a native asset. This is where the idea of a Bitcoin L2 starts to break down. And in the grand tradition of crypto, I would encourage anybody engaging with these protocols here to do your own research. It is widely understood and widely reported that it's not clear where the TVL comes from, and it's not clear in some cases what the consensus mechanism even is. But it's a wide space for experimentation. We encourage that, and we hope that as some of these protocols mature, they start to take security a little bit more seriously. I'm going to give you a run through some of the characteristics of Rootstock here. So firstly, secured by proof of work. Every block, every asset, and every transaction on Rootstock is secured by the Bitcoin mainnet. Why? It's an immutable ledger, maximal decentralization, it's extremely resistant to attacks, and it has an economic model, which means it's probably going to be around for many decades and many centuries. On the contrary, other L2s, they have different mechanisms, nothing wrong with proof of stake in principle, but if you are securing a secondary Bitcoin network using a different consensus mechanism, the trust assumptions start to break down as you move Bitcoin out of the main network into a sidechain. So I think this is where, if you're thinking about programmatic Bitcoin, which is core to what Rootstock is, you want to make sure that you're also inheriting the best of what Bitcoin is, not just the programmability in Rootstock, but also the security and the decentralization and its store of value. As it moves outside of the kind of traditional consensus mechanism of Bitcoin, the trust assumptions start to break down. Anchored to Bitcoin through merge mining. So, some novel components here. So I'll summarize exactly how merge mining works. So a template is sent out into the mining pools whenever that merge mine with Rootstock. Every one of those miners runs a Rootstock node, and there's 0 or 1 different in the header, which determines that is a merge-mined Rootstock block as well. So you can see on the Bitcoin mainnet, for over 6.5 years now, there have been Rootstock transactions and Rootstock blocks that are anchored into the Bitcoin mainnet. So we have been present on the Bitcoin mainnet for some time. Rootstock directly contributes to the Bitcoin security budget. We fund the Bitcoin miners. We support the decentralized business model that is Bitcoin. And the miners receive rewards in Bitcoin, not a secondary token or an altcoin. Other L2s do things slightly differently. So some share the fees with miners or validators in a non-BTC token. State validation is determined on Ethereum as opposed to on the sidechain or on Bitcoin mainnet. And there are many L2s which are not anchored to Bitcoin at all, which asks the question, are they really Bitcoin L2s? What are they at all? When you bridge Bitcoin to Rootstock, you use the proof of work peg. And this is because Bitcoin is the native gas token. You need Bitcoin to operate on Rootstock. Longest running Bitcoin bridge in operation. The defense in depth principle is essentially, the analogy I'd use is that if you're going to try and break into a bank, you need multiple levels of security before you get there. Or if you're going to try and attack the heart of a castle, you need multiple levels of security and defense before you can get in. And this is really what the defense in depth principle is all about. There are over 19 different security walls in order to in a hostile way touch the PowPeg, and it's never gone down. Security audits which are run on an annual basis essentially determine that we've built something that, in terms of a bridge to Bitcoin, is pretty much as good as you can get, given the challenges that Bitcoin has for bridging assets in and out. But this is why we are building BitVM-X. So BitVM-X is our own implementation of Robin Linus's BitVM architecture, which is a mechanism to perform disputable computation on Bitcoin itself. I heard it recently described as a Rube Goldberg machine in order to get around the challenges that touching Bitcoin creates. I think perhaps, given this is an Ethereum conference, many of you might not have heard about BitVM before, but what I can say, we watch this sector very closely, is that there are no optimistic rollups on Bitcoin today. No one has built a ZK verification and hashed it onto the Bitcoin mainnet. What you're seeing at the moment is a number of teams trying, but no one's done it yet, and we're confident that the BitVM-X architecture will be one of the first. So this is essentially going to be a secondary bridge between Bitcoin and Rootstock. We chose EVM primarily because if you're going to scale Bitcoin, you want to do so in a way that means the maximum number of developers, the maximum number of protocols, and the maximum number of tokens can connect with and interact with that network. So it was a scalability choice. It's been proven right. It means that Rootstock is widely interoperable. Launching protocols and launching assets on the network is relatively straightforward. And it means that we don't need to build custom tools. We don't need to engage in niche programming languages. And we basically don't need to fall into the trap of other Bitcoin L2s, which have to kind of engage in non-Web3 environments for development. Wrapping up a little bit here, so DeFi protocols, I was looking at one of the presentations this morning, did a really good job of explaining how different L1s and L2s tend to focus on a particular community or particular use case. And if you think about Rootstock, it's relatively simple. It's DeFi on Bitcoin with Bitcoin. So we've been bringing tier 1 Ethereum protocols over to Rootstock now for several years, and over 160 protocols, including some of the largest on Ethereum, as well as the native Bitcoin DeFi apps. And I think this has meant that the robustness of those protocols and the complexity of the ecosystem and the opportunities within that ecosystem for putting your Bitcoin to work has basically meant that Rootstock has differentiated itself as the #1 Bitcoin DeFi ecosystem. But given that Bitcoin was the native asset, we kind of struggled with this Bitcoin builder scaling problem, which is how do you create a value capture mechanism if the native token and the incentive mechanism is directly connected to Bitcoin itself? And the answer is we created an ecosystem scaling DAO, which uses RIF as the governance token, has a builder's incentives market to encourage pooling of transaction fees from all of the builders on Rootstock, distributes 19% of the transaction fees from Rootstock into the DAO, the other 79% and going to the Bitcoin miners, and the 2% going to the pegnatories, which essentially is going to create a situation where, if we're successful, Rootstock Labs, my role, and the centralized organization that supports the network today can disappear. So, the message here is that Rootstock has survived. It's been a long journey for us, but we're confident that what we've built in the first Bitcoin sidechain and the path we've shown for others is going to survive well into the future. It's hard being first. You have to solve the problems before anyone else does, instead of being able to copy and clone. And we're really excited about what the future of Bitcoin L2s looks like. So in summary, the most secure, longest running Bitcoin L2 with the best developer tools and the most advanced DeFi ecosystem, which is what we consider to be a true Bitcoin L2. If you are building a protocol that needs to connect with the Bitcoin network, you need a security mechanism that you can anchor into. If you are trying to interface in any way with the Bitcoin network, instead of having to go through all the complexity in doing so, you can write a smart contract or connect in or bridge into the Rootstock network, and it's the simplest way to program with Bitcoin today. Thanks very much.